change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. We're excited to be here today. I'm Nathan Chappell. I'm here with Scott Rosenkrantz, coast to coast, talking about all things AI, nerdy, and fundraising. So I don't know, Scott, we have a lot to go over today. You and I keep this like ongoing laundry list. We never get through it all, but I know today there's some pretty interesting and fun things that we want to share. Why don't you start? I had this amazing thing that happened yesterday, amazing and horrifying, scary thing about binary code. So maybe let's start with yours first, and then I'll go into that.
Okay. I mean, you're giving the audience some suspense there,
Right.
but
It's called a
I
hook.
get it.
So you got to stay on to the mid roll.
So let's start with not scary stuff. Microsoft announced a new deepfake tool that they released in a research paper. I just read it this morning before jumping into this podcast. With a single image and a speech audio clip, you can do incredible deepfakes. They say they're not going to release it to the public. They say that they're not going to put in an API, but the fact that these tools are just coming out more and more and more, like Microsoft can do it. I mean, we've seen that there've been plenty of LLMs that just somebody in France built their own, and they're pretty capable. So we know that the capability is going to come out, and it is going to get a bit scary. I mean, I think I just watched Mona Lisa rap Paparazzi, which isn't a song I know existed, but now I do, and I only know Mona Lisa singing it. So the stuff is wild out there.
Yeah, it's a far cry from like Jib Jab, right? Like, I mean, I love Jib Jab. I mean, sending those cards at Christmas.
You might have dated yourself.
I mean,
there.
and the voices. Oh, for sure, I date myself all the time. It's a far cry. So you're saying it takes a single photo and then essentially manipulates the photo to make it look like words are coming out and it looks real.
Yeah, and like the mouth isn't 100%. But it's close enough that it'll fool the majority of people, right? If you don't know to be on the lookout for this, then you're going to get fooled by it, especially if there's going to be someone that you respect or somebody, a politician or something, saying something that's a little bit more concerning. You're not going to be worried about their voice and do the lips sync up. You're just going to be like, oh my God, did you hear this?
So better than Jib Jab. So
much better than Jib Jab.
I mean, for someone who loves Microsoft Paint, I would have thought you'd be all over Jib Jab. But anyway, I'll digress. So we saw this happen. I think it's an interesting thing for two reasons. One is Microsoft saying, hey, we have this capability, but we're not going to release it because I mean, frankly, they know the societal implications of this, right? And this podcast is all about really talking about responsible, beneficial AI, societal implications of how good things that you could do with AI and bad things. We talked before on one episode about the ability for nonprofits to essentially take a quote unquote deep fake of, say, a founder and then basically load it with all of the content. So I think of Danny Thomas at St. Jude, because I think of anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Danny Thomas is quote unquote a digital twin of Danny Thomas alive. And it's like, hey, thanks so much for joining St. Jude. Like, I envision this incredible place where children are going to come for free and we're going to be leading the world in research. That's 100% possible. So like this technology for nonprofit from that orientation is just pretty impressive. Only the other reason I think it's interesting is because OpenAI released, there was a similar statement like 2 weeks ago where it was like, hey, we have this capability. And I think it had to do with same video, right? It was like, you would remember video or deep fake kind of thing. And they said, hey, we have this capability, but hey, we're not going to release it because we're not sure if it's really safe, right? So it's really a similar thing.
Right. And it's all, I mean, there were numbers going out earlier about how many people are voting in elections this year. Right. There's going to be a huge year for elections. And I know there was talking about ChatGPT waiting until GPT-5 to roll out post-election, but I think there's rumors that it's going to come out this summer. Like, it's concerning. And it brings me back to our conversation with Mallory a couple of weeks ago, where AI is not good or bad, right? Like, you don't ask if a hammer is a good or a bad tool, right? It's just a tool. It's a matter of you can use it to cause harm to someone or build a house, right? So AI is just this tool. I know you like my analogies.
You went dark on that one. I'm like, whoa. Okay. Yeah, no, I keep them going.
I think it's just a dark episode. But it's just this tool. And so you have to be, I think it's on the obviously the user of the tool, are they using it for good or ill intent? But then it's also on the viewer. Like you just need to be wary and aware that this is an option that people can be using it to deceive.
Right, right. Yeah, no, and I applaud Microsoft and OpenAI for at least hitting pause. I will transition into Meta's latest information this week. So that applaud their ability to pause or desire to pause and just say, hey, like we should evaluate this and whether or not it's essentially they're going to increase technology where essentially they are stamped that they're deep fake. And so they're essentially coded kind of like with an NFT, like a non-fungible token, so that it can be traced to say, oh, that is not so and so saying that they're going to declare war against China. And that's something that a lot of people are advocating for, is that essentially AI will have software safety precautions built into it. That brings us into our other favorite organization to talk about, and so which is Meta, of course. And so Meta did the same exact model, teach it how to build a chemical weapon. And then Facebook took it off the market and basically we're like, oh, just kidding. It's not ready for prime time. But obviously that was too late. So once it's gone open source, it's everywhere. And I was talking to someone the other day who they grabbed it in those 3 days and it's been replicated a gazillion times. So you can't really contain it. So the new news this week is that Meta's at it again with Meta Llama 3. And apparently it's 140 billion parameters. I mean, it's going to perform as well or better than GPT-4, which is a whole nother conversation we'll have later about basically how all these models are essentially like bottled water and they're stealing each other's data. But it's multimodal, so meaning, text and visual capabilities. It's got, I don't know, basically all the bells and whistles that you'd expect, but with an open source model. I have this like love hate like relationship with open source because I believe in it from the sense of like let everyone be able to, let's democratize AI and let everyone be able to develop,
Right.
and that will accelerate innovation. But at the same time, I get extremely nervous about open source, and essentially because you're reliant on whatever safety precautions whoever released it had built originally. And if there were none,
Right.
which actually having a large language model teach you how to build a chemical weapon, probably not a lot of safety measures. So I don't know, what did this strike you at all? I mean, I think about this from a nonprofit perspective because like, yeah, open source is awesome. Like you don't have to pay OpenAI or anyone else to essentially use these models. But at the same time, there's significant risk in using them if you're uninformed on what the potential dangers are.
Yeah. And my response is I just don't trust Meta, right? Like and I'm probably not alone here, but anything that Mark Zuckerberg puts his name to, like I try to avoid
Well,
it, right? But then
they're not going to sponsor this podcast anytime soon. Probably. I guess.
I mean, I love Meta. No, I will not go that route. But then they also have Jan LeCun, who I think is very trustworthy, right? He's heading the AI division of Meta. And so he does fully believe in open source. And to your point, like it is necessary to further research, to further capabilities, further like technical components of this. But it's just, I don't know I don't like the fact that it could be open to anyone and they can do poisoning on it. We've already talked about how people can make plugin kind of code into the LLM to make it respond in a certain way that is not the way that it should.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is really a philosophical question, right? I believe it's whether or not humans are inherently good or bad, right? And we know that they're not binary, that there are lots of people that will use all technology for good. And then we know that people that will just only look to exploit technology to essentially gain whatever they're trying to gain, whether it's financial or political power, or whatever it might be. And that's where the speed and the race for scale, and then to put things out there that aren't fully tested, I think is in a lot of ways highly irresponsible. And so we'll just kind of say it there. I don't know that there's any way to stop that because the incentives that continue to drive, I mean, Meta believes that providing open source code is actually giving them a market advantage. So to your point, you brought this up, I think last week or the week before, which is like, it's almost no matter what they do, their stock price is pretty resilient. And for whatever reason, their shareholders of Meta reward their desire to bring things to open source that are because they believe in this idea of like democratizing AI. And so it's a hard thing. Those financial incentives are essentially allowing and incentivizing that. But at the same time, I think we sit here at Fundraising AI really thinking about not just the short-term implications. Frankly, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about short-term implications, but I spend a lot of time thinking about long-term implications and unintended consequences. And so that's
Mhm.
not a fun place to live, but it's a place where if that's your orientation, that's where you keep yourself up at night.
I did want to bring up in relation to this, because you've been following this, the Edelman Trust Barometer just came out recently, and year after year, there is less and less trust in tech, which is understandable, right? Again, we've talked many times about the harm that Meta has caused to especially teens, but in the place of nonprofits where trust is, like you always say, our currency, right? How are they supposed to adopt AI when they know that it's going to be the need that they need to displace the generosity crisis to be able to reach out to all their constituents and have that close relationship and offload some of the burden of not having the resources, but having all this work. So we know the reason for using AI, right? We talk about it all the time, but there's also this significant distrust in tech. So it's kind of this, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, right? And I think it just kind of comes back to why we have this conversation, why we have fundraising AI, to make it a little bit more actionable, a little bit more manageable, and show you that it's not all or nothing. You don't have to avoid it altogether. You don't have to jump in all the way, but it's a matter of just kind of testing it out, starting and being smart about it, and having those conversations with team members, with colleagues, with peers, that you're doing it in a responsible and beneficial fashion.
That's such an important report to bring up because I've been following Edelman for a number of years. We talk about it a lot in the book Generosity Crisis. Trust is essentially the stitching that keeps communities together, that keeps, societies together. And I think a lot of people, and Edelman's been studying this for 20 something years, I think 23, 24 years now. Something happened a few years ago, 3 years ago now, I guess, is where they actually showed that people trust for-profit businesses more than nonprofit businesses. And that was every year they have a theme, and that was a big deal. Like essentially for-profit businesses are giving the appearance that they are more competent and more ethical than nonprofits, and therefore become more trustworthy than nonprofits. And I remember reading that a couple of years ago, and like the hair on my neck stood up, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And this year, to your point, the entire theme of the report is around technology. The trust in every domain is down. So trust in government, trust in media, trust in all over is down, and technology, I think, is the next frontier, right? And I think it's probably warranted a healthy dose of skepticism. This came up the other day because someone posted online this idea that where people are afraid to put information in a large language model, even though you can turn on privacy settings that you won't retain or train, my data won't retain or train, say OpenAI or whatever. And why are people still not trusting of it? Well, I think my response on LinkedIn was, because every one of those same companies is being sued for stealing data from someone else. Right. So it's like, of course I don't.
Why would you trust
them?
that?
I mean, I tend to be like, okay, well, I click the box and I'm going to load something in there, and I have to trust that they're not going to use that. But I mean, the reality is that I think pretty much every company that's building large language models, like all of the Big 10, are in some sort of copyright lawsuit at the current moment about essentially collecting data illegally. So it's this like complete like dichotomy of like, trust us, except that maybe maybe we're not shady, or maybe we are. This actually brings us up to the next thing that blew up this week, which was OpenAI essentially being sued by Google for essentially stealing data from YouTube. And so we knew this a couple of years ago. We were like, okay, so if large language models have read all written text ever created that is available online, what's the next set of data? And I, to be honest, it kind of surprised me because I thought by next year, next year we'll have consumed all video content because that's the next big frontier. Surprised, not surprised that it's already happened. And so OpenAI essentially took 1 million hours of video content from YouTube, which apparently Google says violates their user whatever agreement. And so that's the latest thing this week. So I don't know if that one, did it catch you off guard at all? Or were you just like, yeah, no, duh, we knew that was going to happen? And
I mean, we knew it was going to happen, especially how long ago was it that, what was it, New York Times had the interview with OpenAI's CTO and asked her where they pulled us.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. A couple weeks ago, not long ago.
Right?
And she was like, pretty like shady.
I don't really know.
Right.
Yeah. You probably know.
Yeah.
Right. And it that kind of ties to, we just saw, you sent me a text about it just the other day, that Apple just released software that an update to their iOS that allows you to see transcripts of podcasts.
Right.
Right. Because I think that's how OpenAI pulled it. I think they pulled all the
From
transcripts.
transcripts.
Right. So you couldn't have done that with Apple's podcast. Granted, podcasts are on many different platforms, but at least Apple's not the one providing all that data now. Now they are, but also OpenAI, Gemini, I mean, they've all been built on large data sets.
Yeah.
So it's probably already pulled from somewhere else. It's not too surprising.
No, it
It's not so
surprised
surprising.
me it happened as fast as it happened. But then again, we shouldn't be surprised. And the copyright thing, I think, is so interesting and it's so much more complex than we give it credit for. I'm not obviously an attorney, but when you think about copyright, it's about stealing someone's information and displaying that information for a resale or for your benefit, right? To say that, hey, you created that. And the argument from OpenAI, which I actually have to really get behind, is that like, well, we took this data, but the data itself is not being plagiarized and it's never being presented back in the way that it was consumed. So data was consumed, it will be presented back in a complete new novel way that won't be essentially plagiarized. And so it's not the traditional definition of copyright that we're used to. And I think that's the big nuance of all these lawsuits. And it's like, well, New York Times or whoever it is, it's like, we're just going to have to go through this entire legal battle and frankly come up with a new definition of what is and what is not copyright protected. It's a little different than what Google's claiming, which is a violation of user guidelines or whatever, but they're all kind of the same and they're all much more complex. And I think it's going to be several years until they all get sorted out. But every company's entangled in everyone's thing. And at the same time, they're all investing in each other's companies also, right? So it's just so weird and convoluted. It's such a spider web.
Right. And then, but I do think that's a good transition to, so Google's mad at OpenAI for pulling the data from YouTube, right? They want to hold on to their data so that they can build stronger models, but then talk about the text exchange you had with somebody else on Google's use of their models.
You want to go there? So we're back to square one. So this happened yesterday, and I've shared this before. If there was a scale of like how much of a conspiracy theorist are you, I'd probably lean on the. I mean, you've spent a lot of time with me, probably in the 60%. I don't have a bunker. I'm not like I'm not a prepper, but I do hypothesize on like how things could go wrong. And this was just a weird little example. So this came up the other day. We were talking about actually our intro in our podcast. So the woman intro, which is, if people don't know, the voice probably sounds a little familiar because it's from OpenAI and it's Scarlett Johansson's voice. So that is not in fact a person. And it's just interesting. Like we were talking about that. And then at the bottom of it was like, hey, here's who to email and my absence. But this, because actually you brought it to me first. You're like, and you were kind of like, hey, did you know? And then you're like, yeah, you. And so like, it didn't take you more than a millisecond, but I received so many emails. Actually, I think you received emails about it. I mean, my Amanda received emails about it. And like, hey, by the way, Nathan's email is broken. Like somehow people thought that Outlook was just like generating binary code because like it went back to like the 1960s or 70s.
Why not?
Like, or whatever.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of emails. And so, but this was the most interesting one. So then I actually posted on LinkedIn and it just started this whole dialogue and people were responding in the comments in binary, which totally probably jacked up LinkedIn's algorithm in some way. I'm surprised I didn't get kicked out of LinkedIn. But I get this email yesterday from Jason Shug. And if you're listening, Jason, hey, from USC, he's like, hey, by the way, your out of office message has binary at the top and it says, hello, this is a test. And I'm like, that's weird. So, I mean, of course, Jason knew it was binary and he put it in and I didn't know what he put it into. He's like, this is a test. And I'm like, that's weird. And so I respond, I'm like, well, no, it actually says, sorry to miss you, amazing human. And I literally showed him the binary and which literally the letters that the ones and zeros responded to. And he's like, that's interesting because he goes, I put it into Gemini and I got, this is a test. And so then I'm like, wait, what the heck? Like binary is binary. Like there's literally the definition.
Right. There's no way
of right or wrong,
right?
There's no gray area here. Like there should be zero interpretation. And it's also the code that all code is derived from. All computer circuits are derived from ones and zeros that like literally circuits that switch on and off. And
which Google should know pretty well. You would think.
All of Google's built on binary. So I'm like, what the heck? And so I tried it. So I was like, well, this is really weird. So I tried it in OpenAI, tried it in Claude, tried it in Perplexity. All of them got my same answer. Like it was all what I had originally put up there was, sorry to miss you, amazing human. So he goes in again a second time to Gemini and it literally comes back with the answer, storm is coming. from the same binary. So first one, hello, this is a test. Second time, storm is coming. And I'm like, what the crap? Like, I'm thinking
Of all the things.
I mean, this is totally a conspiracy thing. I was like literally floored. I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is like, I mean, I could go so dark on this really quick. It's like Gemini is basically saying, screw you. I'm not interpreting your binary and a storm is coming. And then I tried it on Gemini a few times and I couldn't even give it, it wouldn't even provide it. Well, first it asks, he's like, well, which type of binary are you using? I'm like, doesn't matter. Give me both. Right. And then and then it tried again and it only gave me like the first word and the first letter of the second word. It was just the weirdest thing, which
That's so
shows you the
strange.
fickleness of like the technology that we're talking about. But literally the code that all code is based on should not be up for interpretation. I get how large language models like are built on transformer technology that are designed to not give you the same answer twice, but binary should always give you the same answer twice.
Yes. Yeah. Just like math.
Yeah.
Math.
Shout out to Jason
It's
for
concrete.
giving us this thing that kept me up last night. I don't know. I totally know I'm overthinking this whole thing, but like, you know what? I also was feeling like, let's get back to binary. Like, I feel the world is so squishy. Like, I actually kind of appreciated like people sending messages back and forth in binary because it's like, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And really kind of, there's some comfort in that.
I mean, you'll have to take the time to actually read the message, translate it, and make sure you're translating it correctly, not by using Google.
Right.
So it might make more that I'm not going to skim through this because I can't.
Right.
Right.
It was funny too. Some of the
Force you
people
to slow down a little bit.
Yeah, some of the people in the responses were like, "Oh, they went into ChatGPT and they're like, "Hey, this is binary. Can you translate this for me?" And it's funny because obviously, like all code is derived from binary. So, like, if you're listening to this podcast and you want to play around with binary, just go into ChatGPT and be like, "Hey, give me the binary for I don't know. Thank goodness it's Friday," and it will do that very easily. When you go to put binary into any large language model outside of Gemini, apparently, then just put it in. You don't even have to explain it because clearly it knows binary and it just says, oh, this looks like you're having fun with binary. This is what it says. And it's our own little like Morse code, I think. So I think that's all of our text messages are going to be binary from now on.
I wonder how Grok would have translated it.
I don't know. Probably like, yeah, storm is coming. Screw you. Like, I don't know. What are you going to do about it? Something like that. Yeah. We've been talking about Grok a lot lately and I still have you played with it?
I haven't.
Yeah, it's so weird.
I
I'm
haven't.
just not into it. And I'm sure people have had a lot of fun with it, but and that also just went open source a couple weeks ago. So what could go wrong? The most divisive data set in the entire planet, really like fully polarized data set. I mean, pros and cons, but putting that out into open source, like, oh, yeah, nothing's going to go wrong with that.
And that's a good segue because I did just news came up yesterday that Grok posted fake news about the Indian prime minister getting ousted, which didn't happen. And I think attack on Tel Aviv, which also didn't happen. So open source, already putting out fake news to a pretty broad audience, right?
Yeah.
How many billion Twitter users are there? X users?
Yeah.
So yeah, not going too well so far.
So from a fundraising AI perspective, I think this is just our mantra is like this technology is not going anywhere. This is more transformative. This exponential nature in the growth of this technology is absolutely going to transform everything. It will transform your job. It will transform your organization. It will transform your social life. And so that's not to say you should not use it. You absolutely should use it because the digital divide will essentially determine that you're a winner or loser with this. And you have an opportunity to be a winner. Your organization has an opportunity to win in this and to level up in ways that were never before possible. But it's also to say, use thoughtful consideration. It goes back to our other mantra of responsible AI is everyone's responsibility. That evaluate and think through and talk with people and listen to podcasts like this and others that will help you realize or better understand what are the implications, both short term and long term. So that's kind of our soapbox on this entire fundraising AI journey. And I hope it's really setting in with people. Use the technology, level up in amazing ways, offload the crap stuff you don't like to do that allows you to do more of the fun stuff you like to do. And then, but use it in a way that does the least amount of harm as possible. If
and talk to others about it. Talk to us and let us know what you're using, what we should be using, how you're using it, things that work, things that don't work. Let us know things you want us to talk about. Like we want this to be an engaging conversation to help anyone who's listening out there.
Yeah. So next week, I want to talk about robots because there's some big advances in robots, even though I don't know. I mean, we know that some nonprofits are kind of playing around with some robot technology, mostly the really nerdy type of nonprofits. And then I think my favorite podcast episode this week, I actually listened to it twice, is from Your Undivided Attention on essentially it's called The Chips Are the Future of AI. So I want to talk about that next week because not that we'll get so nerdy in like how GPUs are actually made and who makes them, but I think it's fascinating to think about the implications and sort of the arms race on compute power and how that's going to shape the world, but specifically the nonprofit sector. So next week we'll have some more nerdy stuff to talk about, as we always do. Any last words, Scott, for today?
We should also get back to how different roles in nonprofit shops are using this. So we'll have an episode coming up on that. And then we could probably have an episode coming up on books. What are our favorite books to go to learn how to use it, just kind of stay up to date?
Yep.
So a lot of exciting stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. We love the feedback that we're hearing. Let us know how we can continue to meet your needs. And we will see you on the flip side. Take care.
Thanks all.